Good evening. How is karmic law related to the mind creation of the second chapter of Genesis? The mind creation, which is given in the second chapter of Genesis, is a product of universal mind. It has no relationship whatsoever to the spiritual creation given in the first chapter of Genesis. In the first chapter of Genesis, you have God, infinite divine consciousness, expressing itself from its own self, evolving as form out of the substance of its own being. And therefore, you can have the crop before the seed. You can have light before there is a sun, because there are no mental or physical processes. There is only consciousness evolving. And consciousness can just as well evolve as a seed as a full-grown tree, or it could evolve as a full-grown tree before the seed, because it is consciousness evolving. Now, when we come to this second chapter of Genesis, creation, we do not have God forming itself or expressing itself. What we have is mind. And mind follows processes. And here you have the good and the evil, because anything that is formed of mind is formed of good and of evil. In the same way, you can think good thoughts and you can think evil thoughts. You can think generous thoughts. You can think stingy thoughts. You can think moral thoughts or sensual thoughts. And the reason is that the mind has the capacity of both good and evil. And it makes no difference that a person may spend 9/10 of their life thinking and doing good. They always have the potentiality of changing and doing evil. On the other hand, there isn't any record of anyone at all who has been able to live a thoroughly good life, completely free of any trait of error or evil. And the reason is that the human mind, which is the foundation of human life, is itself made up of the belief in two powers. Therefore, the karmic law has to do entirely with the man and the universe of mind's creation, the mental creation, which is imaging forth our state of mind. You know that in the human picture, well, we have such a saying, for instance, as you can take the man out of the country, but you can't take the country out of a man. Or you can take a man out of the ghetto, but you can't take the ghetto out of a man. In other words, an individual is always, on the human plane, showing forth their individual state of consciousness. If they are wholly honest, that is the particular state of consciousness they are showing forth. If they're not, that is that particular. If they're healthy, that is that state of consciousness. If they're not healthy, that is that state of consciousness. When an individual transcends the realm of mind, they are no longer showing forth their state of consciousness. They are then showing forth God's glory. In other words, the heavens declare the glory of God. Why? because the heavens weren't made by man, and man can't control the heavens. The earth showeth forth his handiwork. Why? Because man can't do anything to the earth. The earth is showing forth God's glory. So it is that in proportion, and remember that statement, in proportion as an individual rises above the realm of mind, in that proportion are they no longer showing forth their state of consciousness, but God's consciousness. In other words, purity, harmony, wholeness, completeness, perfection. Now, since we were born only because of this realm of mind, we have, since before conception, been controlled by mind. So that even in our spiritual studies and progress, we still react in some measure to the carnal mind. To some extent, within a short while after our spiritual studies begin, we begin to show forth some of God's glory. More of health, more of harmony, more of abundance, more of gentleness, or less of criticism, or less of judgment, less of condemnation, less of fear, less of doubt, less of sin. And in the degree that our mortality and our mortal qualities lessen, we are now beginning to show forth some of God's glory. The further we go, the higher we go, the less we manifest qualities of mind, and more do we manifest the qualities of spirit. And so when a person reaches the place where they just have no temper anymore, and no impatience anymore, and no doubt anymore, they are really beginning to show forth a life of God. That is, the glory of God made individually manifest. In the degree that an individual loses their fear, well, first their hatred and condemnation of sin, and then their fear of it, and as they lose their fear of death, in that degree they are showing forth more of life eternal. Because where there is no fear of death, there is the livingness, the expression of immortality. So it is then that we are really dual beings, in the sense that at all times we are showing forth some measure of mortality, of the universal belief in good and evil. It lessens. You can tell how it lessens if you think back perhaps on your days of complete humanhood, and remember how much more subject you were to the weather, how much more colds or grippe or flu touched you than they do now, or how much less you have to concern yourself with aspirin or cathartics. And you realize when you stop to think of that, why I'm not being handled as much by universal belief. I am more free of these mortal belief conditions. Therefore, I must be showing forth more of divine harmony. And so you will see that you keep ascending and ascending and ascending until you find that you are not even being affected quite as much by the calendar. You are not showing forth the signs of age that the human race ordinarily would show at 50 or 60 or 70 or 80, as the case may be. And the less you are responding to the calendar, the more of God's glory you are showing forth. The more you are victimized by the calendar, the greater evidence it is that you are still being controlled by the carnal mind belief in two powers. In the same way, as you ascend, you find that your income is not affected by whether there is a good season or bad, or a good year of economy or bad, that in some miraculous way your economic status continues the same or improving regardless of what condition the world may be going through. Or if you find yourself in positions of danger, such as we have spoken about in war times, you find yourself more immune from danger than most of the world. And the reason is there is less of the carnal mind operating in your experience, and you are showing forth a greater degree of God's glory. And of course, with God's glory, you know that there is no such thing as danger, regardless of where you may be. So you will witness that you are either subject to the universal mind and its beliefs and its activities, or you are responding more and more to the spiritual urge and less to the carnal mind. Now, the question naturally arises as to how we may free ourselves of the activity of what we call universal mind. And actually, that is the essence of the major principle of the infinite way. You see, the mystical side of the message of the infinite way hasn't any trace of newness or originality. It is a secret of life that has been known throughout all time. The name and nature of God has always been known, only that it has been kept secret from the masses. And the reason is that it is difficult for the human mind to rise high enough to be able to receive it without getting egotistical and starting to flap the arms and say, I am, I am, I am, I am, I am, I am. But the secret of I am has always been known, because it has been revealed thousands of years BC. Moses, of course, is one of our great examples, not only of knowing it, but showing forth the demonstration of what it can do. And Jesus, of course, is our great exemplar in that direction, because with his understanding of the name and nature of God and his oneness with that, his whole demonstration of the religious life is shown forth. And so it is that the mysticism of the infinite way is just another unfoldment or revelation, as has taken place in almost every century in history. As we read the religious literature of the world, we can find almost in almost every century some one or more to whom has been revealed this same mystical revelation. And we also learn that in every case the revelator was able to impart it to some group of disciples or students. The difficulty always has been that by the time it reached the second or third generation, it disappeared, and always for the same reason, because it was organized. Now, this part, which has to do with our healing work, is not readily discovered and not readily found and not readily understood. But the basis of our work, insofar as it concerns healing work and freeing ourselves from the conditions of the carnal mind, lies in this. It has been revealed that we suffer the discords of material sense by virtue of a hypnotism or malpractice. In other words, there is a universal belief in good and evil, which constitutes a nothingness which we call carnal mind or mortal mind. Through this activity of the belief in two powers operating universally, we come under its influence at the very moment of conception, so that by, let's use the word, either hypnotism or malpractice, from the moment of conception, we are under the law of good and evil, and we may come through harmoniously for 9 months to perfect birth, or anything can happen in between to wreck it. And we aren't responsible, and our parents aren't responsible. It is only because of an operation in human consciousness of a hypnotism or malpractice due to this universal belief in two powers. Now, when fall comes and you have your first cold rains and you begin to sniffle, you will discover that probably 3 or 4 out of 10 other people are doing the same thing. And therefore, it isn't your wrong thinking that is making you do it. It is because of this universal hypnotism or malpractice due to this belief in two powers. Now, if you yourself were to recognize this, and when fall begins, realize, I need not be subject to a world mesmerism. I can break it by realizing that this hypnotism or malpractice is not of God, is not spiritually ordained, and has no spiritual law. Therefore, it is not power. Now, the more you live in the realization that you are not subject to the world's beliefs, to the universal malpractice or universal hypnotism of the belief of two powers, the more you free yourself from that influence and live under grace instead of under law. In the same way, when you are a practitioner, there is only one way you can free your patients, and that is to be very sure that you don't malpractice them by telling them that it's their wrong thinking that did it, or their parents' wrong thinking, or their neighbor who belongs to the wrong church. You, as a practitioner, must realize that this evil appearance is the product of a mortal malpractice or mesmeric sense due to this belief in two powers, and that none of this has power because it's not ordained of God. God must be understood as omnipotence. If you understand God as omnipotence, all power, you then can realize that hypnotism or mesmerism or the universal mind or the universal belief in two powers is not power. And in that degree of your realization, do you free yourself and your patients. It isn't difficult to take a group of people who are desirous of the spiritual life, of knowing God. It is not difficult to free them within a year or 2 years from coming under most of the world's claims. And then it's up to them to maintain that harmony by a knowing of the truth. Ye shall know the truth. Now, the truth as it has been given to us in the infinite way is that all evil, regardless of its name or nature, is the product of a universal hypnotism or malpractice based on the belief of two powers, that which threw Adam and Eve out of Eden, the belief in good and evil. Now, this isn't your belief, and it isn't my belief. It is a universal belief, but we come under it by virtue of our ignorance of it. In the same way that a few years ago they were able, by virtue of this subliminal perception advertising, to make 57% to 75% of the people go out and buy the product that they were advertising without those people knowing that they were under hypnosis, that they were under mental suggestion. And yet they carried out the orders of those who were mentally suggestionizing. Go down and buy Coca-Cola, go down and buy popcorn, and in other cases, other things were done. In one experiment that was done on television, while the public sat looking at their regular television program, all of a sudden they jumped up from their seat, went to the telephone, answered the telephone, and found out that nobody was there and it hadn't rung. Why? Because through the medium of the television, they had been mentalized into believing that they heard the telephone ring, and they jumped up to answer it. Now, this is exactly what happens when we come down under universal beliefs of colds, grippe, flu, consumption, cancer, unemployment, poverty, nasty dispositions, all the rest of these human traits. We are not at fault. We are being suggestionized. We are being hypnotized by a universal mesmerism. No individual is doing it. No group of individuals is doing it. It is a universal sense which Paul recognized when he said, I do not sin, but I feel a sense of sin in me. In other words, he's responding to this universal belief. So it is. One of the first teachings given to me that brought about the start of this work was that the metaphysical field was wrong in ascribing error to wrong thinking or to an individual's wrong thinking. And be assured that I worked for years and years and years with this principle until I found out by the healings that they were wrong and I was right. And we are proving it now in our world experience, because we are freeing those who come to us in some measure. We are freeing them from the universal hypnotism, and thereby, within a year or two, finding our students with far less problems than they had when they came to us, and with a better ability to handle them than they ever knew before. Because now no one has to sit down and say, what wrong thinking am I doing, or what sin am I committing, or what fault is there in me. No one has to waste time like that. No one has to go through the horrible process of psychology and psychiatry only to find out that it doesn't work. Our students can begin to understand at any moment that whatever discord is touching them is a universal malpractice, a universal hypnotism, all having its origin in Adam and Eve's acceptance of two powers, good power and evil power. Now, as you recognize this, and then take the next step of realizing that which does not come from God is not power. Therefore, the activity of the human mind or carnal mind is not power. The activity of this universal belief is not power, and you will find it will not come nigh your dwelling place. Now, and it will not come nigh it in proportion to the depth of your realization of it. And that is why I stress three words: omnipresence, so that you will know that where you are, God is. You don't have to go searching for God. The place whereon you stand is holy ground right now. And God is closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. So don't waste time trying to find God. God already is omnipresence. Good already is omnipresent. Now, likewise, God is omnipotence, meaning all power. And if you abide in this, you will be declaring that sin, or that which causes it, disease or that which causes it, cannot be power, can only act as power by acceptance. But in and of itself, there is no power in the universal suggestion of a selfhood apart from God, of a presence or a power apart from God. The only presence is omnipresence, even though you are seeing a ghost, even though you are seeing sin, disease, or death. The only presence is omnipresence. And even if you believe you are seeing the power of sin or the power of disease, omnipotence is all there is to power, and that is spirit. God is the only power, regardless of these appearances. And God is omniscience, or wisdom. And therefore, you don't have to know anything about the activity of mind or body. All you have to do is rest in God's omniscience. His wisdom is infinite. And as you abide in this, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, you then are able to say, yes, then there is no other presence, and there is no other power, and this that we call the belief in two powers, the carnal mind, this is not power. This cannot operate in or through man. And this brings you back to 1932, when the revelation was given to me that all evil is impersonal. And this means that it has no person in whom, on whom, or through whom to operate. Therefore, when I am doing treatment work, and I have to do less of it consciously now than in the beginning, but when I do, it takes that form. All evil is impersonal, whether it is a claim of weather, a claim of climate, a claim of the psychic realm, the mental realm, regardless of the name or nature of the evil, it is impersonal. It does not have its rise in you, or him, or her, or it. All evil is impersonal, and this makes it without person, in whom, on whom, or through whom to operate. And one with God is a majority, and where two or more are gathered together, there am I, divine harmony. So that when the patient and the practitioner are in agreement that they are seeking the realization of God, you can be assured that harmony must eventually come through. And the only thing that makes it drawn out is that in their ignorance, the patient is thinking only in terms of getting rid of the pain, only in terms of getting rid of the appearance, and not laying the axe at the root. Now, the root of all evil is the carnal mind, or a belief in two powers. And this belief that there is power in hypnotism, or that there is power in germs, or that there is power in weather or climate, this is what continues to operate even while the patient is merely wanting to get rid of effects. The cause is operating, the belief in two powers, the belief in two beings, two presences, instead of one omnipresence. Now, you will find through this that God is. God absolutely is. And this means that harmony in every form is. It already is. Nothing you can do to bring it about. It already is. But the harmony of God's grace is obscured in our experience by a mesmeric belief in two powers. And in spite of God's presence, any kind of discord can happen to us because God's presence is obscured, because there is a barrier to it reaching us. Remember, nothing can come to you except through your consciousness. And if there is a barrier in your consciousness, and ignorance is the barrier, if there is a barrier, then the activity of God does not come through. And I give you as evidence of that, as I have before, that since God fills all space, and no one questions that, since God fills all space, you will have to give a reason why there can be murder and arson and rape and all the rest of these horrible crimes that are committed, and yet God is omnipresence. How then do you account for it? Well, notice that it doesn't take place where the realization of God is and where the understanding is of one power. In other words, there are whole groups of people, totaling into the millions, who are not alcoholics and who are not drug addicts and who are not in prison. And you'll usually find that those groups are the ones who are not only dwelling in the realization of God's presence, but they are likewise living in the conscious realization of the unreal nature of that which causes the world's discords. Now, every Infinite Way student must learn the impersonal nature of error and the nothingness of that claim of error. They must understand that every evil that afflicts us is the product of this universal hypnotism, this universal belief in two powers, which acts really through a universal malpractice. That must first be recognized. Then secondly, it must be recognized that this is not power. This is the arm of flesh. This is what is called temporal power or nothingness. And if you rest in this word, these evils will not come nigh your dwelling place. Now, it rests with every individual. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. We do know that there is a mental inertia that operates universally in this human world. If it weren't for that, you wouldn't have the wrong people most usually occupying our public offices, not only in this country but in all countries. You wouldn't find that the whole record of human government is one in which 80% of the times the wrong people are in power. This wouldn't be if there weren't mental inertia, because people would sit down and think and reason. But it's so much easier to watch television or listen to the radio or play baseball or watch football that they are lulled into a mental inertia that prevents them even taking common sense thought for their own safety, their own security, and their own peace of mind. Now, it is this same mental inertia that prevents even those who are taught from waking in the morning and not rushing to get out of bed and get dressed and get off to work, but waking early enough to lie there for a little while and realize God's presence and realize that the so-called universal powers of mesmerism or malpractice are not operative in human consciousness because they are not spiritually ordained. They are the arm of flesh or nothingness. You not only nullify it for yourself, but remember that in some degree you are nullifying it for the entire world. You would soon find that a group of diligent students would not only be freeing themselves from discords, they'd gradually be freeing their communities, their families, their neighbors, their friends, their nation, and eventually the world. It isn't easy by any manner of means, because we really have been brought up to blame everybody else for our troubles. And Unfortunately, we do live in an age of psychology which would have us believe that it is everybody else's fault but our own. I remember a book that was sent to me recently which brought out that a young woman was engaged to be married, but the marriage didn't go through. And believe it or not, her whole life is wrecked. Everything has been frustration ever since. And it isn't her fault, you see. No. That just frustrated her life, and she can't be blamed now that everything is frustrated. And there are other books that would tell you that these poor boys in prison are there because they were born in the ghetto. Of course, these books don't tell you about the boys who were born in the ghetto that got to be presidents of corporations and judges on the bench and governors of states and mayors of cities. Oh, no, they close their eyes to that and merely point to the few who got into prison. Nor do they call your attention to the boys from Fifth Avenue in prison and Park Avenue. That must be obscured too. Otherwise, you won't believe that it was environment that did it. This is nonsense. This is nonsense. There are more worthwhile men who have come up from the farm and the ghetto than ever came out of the universities, anywhere, at any time. Probably because there's more of them. But the point is that because they came from the farm or the ghetto hasn't anything whatsoever to do with whether they turned out good or bad. They turned out good or bad for some other reason than where they were born. And they turned out for good or bad also for other reasons than whether their parents chastised them or their school teachers slapped their wrists. Please try to understand that evil is absolutely impersonal in its operation, impersonal in its nature, and never pin evil onto a person. Never give it a cause in that person, but always impersonalize it, and you will remove them from karmic law. Whatever the karmic law was that is responsible, you break for them in the realization of the impersonal nature of it as hypnotism and the nothingization of it because it is not ordained of God and has no law of God to support it. Be assured that I have watched throughout these years the change that takes place in the lives of our students. I saw it even before we had the Infinite Way in the lives of my patients. How after only a year or 2 years, in some cases 3 years, they were more and more freed of the effects of the hypnotism of this world and were showing forth more of God's glory and less of the carnal mind's karmic law. Only when you are living under mind are you living under the law. When you are living under the law, you are living under the karmic law. When you rise above this, by virtue of your realization, there is but one power, and this universal belief in two powers is but temporal power, the arm of flesh or nothingness. You have begun to nullify the effects of karma, whether it's the karma of weather, the karma of inherited traits, the karma of a disposition, the karma of your country's financial condition. You break the karma. You do not live under the law of karma, but you begin to live by grace. It's in your lap. It's in your experience, whether or not you think enough of your freedom to break through the mental inertia that would keep you from sitting 2, 3, or 4 times a day for the conscious realization of these revealed truths. Every one of us was actually created for a spiritual destiny. Only one thing keeps us from our spiritual destiny: the hypnotism that keeps us under the law instead of under grace. Once you know the truth that every form of discord in your life is a form of hypnotism that's being practiced on you, a form of malpractice that's being practiced on you, you'll quickly free yourself. There was a brief period in the history of the Christian Science movement when it was recognized that all evil was malpractice, but that period lasted only a very short while and then became personalized. And so it was that instead of, I don't know that it was ever recognized, it must have been. There must have been some short period in there when the impersonal nature of malpractice was known. But it never lasted very long, because the malpractice taught in Christian Science is most usually a personal malpractice. It either comes from your next door neighbor or the church down the street or the Orientals or the Hebrews or somebody else, and it's always pinned onto somebody or onto some group. And sometimes they even get foolish enough to protect themselves from people and people's thoughts. Now, people and people's thoughts have no power. Once you understand that you are dealing exclusively with the Edenic belief, or rather the belief that started in the Garden of Eden, the belief in two powers, good and evil, which has become so crystallized in human consciousness as to form a malpractice or hypnotism. And when you begin to understand God as omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, and all else as nothingness, you are setting yourself free from that. Now, to show you that it isn't the intervention of God that sets you free or heals you, that it isn't God doing something tomorrow that God isn't doing today, but that it is freeing yourself from the belief in this hypnotic power, so that the God which is present may show forth his glory. You can, for a few minutes, follow me in this. Close your eyes. And let what I say just go in one ear and out the other. Don't try to hold on to it, and don't try to memorize it. Don't try to write it down. Let it just flow into your ear and out of your ear. No attempt now to hold on to this. God is being now. God is being. All being is God. God is all being, and God is all being now, and God is all being here where I am. God is being here where I am. God being is here where I am. God is being here where I am. God is the only being here where I am. God is the all being here and now. Besides God's being, there is no other being here. This being that I am is the presence of God. God. is individual being. God's life is my individual life. Therefore, my life is immortal, eternal, free. God is being, my mind. God is the mind of me. Therefore, I can be aware only of that which constitutes God's being. My mind is the mind that was in Christ Jesus, which is unconditioned. It receives its impartations and wisdom from God, not from observation, from God, from within. God is the being which is my being. God is the life of my body. God is the bread and the meat of my body. God is the water and the wine of my life. God is the power of resurrection unto my experience. And God is being this here and now. God is being. I do not have to appeal to God. God is omnipresence. Where I am, all this is. And in God's presence is fulfillment. I do not have to bring about God's presence. I don't have to bring about God's power. God is being my experience. God's presence is my presence. God's power is the power of my life. God's wisdom is the law of my being. I am governed by spiritual law. I cannot make God do it. I cannot prevent God doing it. Beside God there are no powers. What God hath joined together, no man can put asunder. And my life and God's life is joined. It is the one life. My mind and God's mind is the one mind. Nothing can separate us or divide us. Not even life or death can separate me from the life of God, the love of God, and the abundance of God. For God is being now. God is my being now. I cannot make it so. Not even God can make it so. It is made so from the beginning. My prayer is a realization of is. My meditation is a contemplation of is. God's grace is my sufficiency, and God's grace is operative in my consciousness because of omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience. Is there any power beside God? I know not any. How do I know God's presence? By the word I. I will never leave thee. I will never forsake thee. I have been with you since before Abraham was, but you didn't know it. You weren't consciously aware of it. You were looking for your good outside. And I, in the midst of you, have always been mighty. I, in the midst of you, am mighty. Nothing external to you is mighty. Nothing external to you can enter your consciousness to defile or make a lie. And this world's hypnotism, fear not. For I am omnipresence and omnipotence and omniscience. I that am closer to thee than breathing am your fortress and your high tower and your dwelling place. And all of this is now. It is now, because I and the Father are one, and what God hath joined together, no man, no circumstance, no condition can put asunder. And any belief that I have heretofore accepted of a presence of power from God, a power apart from God, I reject, consciously reject, because of the word omnipotence and omnipresence. If I can decree a thing and make it happen, it is only because I can decree that I need not accept the universal hypnotism of the world, because God is the mind of me. God is my being. And God cannot be influenced. God cannot be influenced, not even for good. Certainly not for evil. God cannot be influenced, and God is my being. Father, forgive me if I have thought that I had a being separate and apart from thee. Forgive me if I have believed that there is a personal being separate and apart from the source of all being, which thou art, which I am. The kingdom of God within me. God is my being, and God is being me now. Being. Not in the past tense, not in the future tense. God is being now. And you will find that as you accept God being, you will also be finding yourself released from the sins and the fears and the diseases of this world. And you won't be pleading with God or begging God or affirming God. You will merely be realizing the very being of God, which God is. The being, the spiritual being, infinite, immortal, eternal being, which is my being. And you'll watch how your mind is not now reaching out to a God. It's not now seeking good. You're completely released in this minute from seeking anything. And only you can make this a permanent experience in your life. I can lift you to a place where you absolutely drop your concern for tomorrow. I can lift you to a place where you can drop your concern for the sins or the diseases or the lacks, merely by lifting you into the realization that God is being in this instant. But now you must go and sin no more. You must not try to reach God, to get God to do something. You must be able to feel a response within you and then begin to live in this realization. Thank you, Father. I need not pray, as Jesus said outside of the tomb of Lazarus. I need not pray. Lazarus, come forth. I need not pray. Divine harmony, come forth. There is no power here operating to prevent you. The only power that claimed to be, or the only claim of power that ever was a universal hypnotic belief that there are two powers, and that there isn't an omnipresence and an omnipotence and an omniscience. But now I accept God. I accept God as being. It makes no difference whether I'm Jew or Gentile. It makes no difference whether I'm white or black or yellow or red. It makes no difference whether I'm bond or free. Here and now, I accept God as my being. I accept God as being me. I accept God. God, God. And I need not go to holy temples or mountains to find him, nor sacrifice. Just accept God as my being, and then become a beholder as the glories of God are made manifest. And realize this: I am living only that God's glory be made manifest through me. Not some human belief in weather or climate or germs. I live only that God's glory be made manifest in me and through me. And you watch how accepting God as being releases you from the need to reach out for a God, to struggle for God, or to get God to do something for you. God is being now, and God is my being now, and all is well.